Bonjour, mon ami. I really hope that means welcome, my friends. I think it does. In any case, welcome. We are now a number of days past the presidential election of 2020, and well, I wanted to wait a few days before I made this video to give us all time to really absorb the experience of the election. But now that we have, I'm mostly, number one, glad to report that all of the cannabis measures passed, the ones I covered in my last video, including the Oregon measure for decriminalizing small possession of all drugs, that passed too. And that proved that the war against the war on drugs is a cleanly nonpartisan thing. Conservative, liberal, red state, blue state, they can all get on board with it. So that was very good to see. Now on to the more partisan side, the presidential and congressional elections. So this is the map right here. As you can see, 538 electoral votes for the oligarchs, 0 for the people, and no toss-ups. I'm kidding, of course. This is the actual map. At least this is the map as Real Clear Politics shows it, and they seem to have sort of the most strict standard for the map, whereas in most other media it's a little bit different. But in any case, this is roughly the map. The reason I showed you guys that joke image is I've jokingly said, well, half jokingly in the past, that as soon as the Democratic primaries ended and we had two corporatists running against two corporatists at the top of the ticket, it really became a who cares type of election. But in any case, here we are. So if nothing unexpected happens in terms of recounts or litigation, we should end up with 306 electoral votes for Biden roughly and around 232 for Trump, which is really interesting because it's almost the exact reverse of the 2016 result. That's kind of freaky and it involves a lot of the same states. Well, I suppose it's not freaky, it's sort of expected, but there you go. Now, the other part of my video regarding the Red Mirage, that part came true perfectly. This is what happens when one candidate actively encourages mail-in voting and the other one does not. What happens is, initially on election night, the one that discouraged the mail-ins looked like he was doing okay, but then as you only had the big cities left to count, and as you had all the mail-ins being counted near the end and they strongly leaned towards that candidate, the one who was against mail-ins started to lose. For myself, I was quite confident on the outcome on Tuesday night and even a lot more so confident on Wednesday morning. And I could do that because all I had to do was wait for some counties to come in that were mostly counted in any state and then compare that data across with the 2016 data and just figure out, was Joe Biden outperforming Hillary Clinton or underperforming? And what I could see was that he was outperforming her, but not by a lot. Shout out, of course, goes out to Alan Lichtman, who I suppose has proven himself to be like the stone cold Steve Austin of predicting presidential elections. That's now 10 correct predictions in a row for him. Kind of sort of on the 2000 election, but we'll give it to him. And he's been making the rounds, doing some interviews. His Canadian interviews in particular with Canadian news have been very good. I'd recommend any of them. So, Alan Lichtman, right again. The other person who definitely should get a shout out over election night is John McCain. His ghost hung heavily over election night. If Arizona wasn't what it was, the whole night would have been a lot tighter, a lot more tense. But you could see Democrats overperforming expectations in Arizona, more so than they were in the other battleground states. They even flipped a Senate seat. A former astronaut is now a senator, which is a good thing. But yeah, you could certainly see that John McCain was present, that the nature of his relationship with Donald Trump affected the end results, and that the old man got one more thumbs down. on us before he left. At least that's how I saw it. The other thing that happened is, much to my disappointment, Mitch McConnell proved that he can pretty much get away with anything and still win by a landslide. He was running against a much younger opponent, a female fighter pilot who had a lot of resources as far as campaign money being injected her way. It didn't help. Mitch McConnell easily won re-election and will now be a sitting senator till he's into his mid 80s. Unless he decomposes on us first. Now, as for the pollsters, those guys have a lot to answer for. They once again messed up the margin by over 3%. Now, when everything is said and done and California's all finished counting, yes, Biden will win the popular vote margin by somewhere in the vicinity of 4%, but he's not going to win it by an 8 to 10% margin, which demonstrates that despite their best efforts, the pollsters have failed to learn to capture the Trump vote. I've talked to a lot of people who are either Trump supporters or sympathetic towards Trump supporters, and over a long period of time, they've convinced me that, yeah, Trump supporters do not want to talk to pollsters. They don't want to talk to them. They don't want to be contacted by them. They don't want to tell them the truth regarding their vote. And there may be no way around this problem. So there you go. In the deeply polarized current situation in the United States, the science of polling does not work, at least with Trumpism. Now, Biden and Pelosi and the Dems should really think long and hard about why this election was so tight. Biden did end up winning the popular vote by around 4%, but he didn't win it by 14%, and I don't see any reason why he shouldn't have won it by that much if the Democratic brand wasn't so broken. Now, everybody has a tendency to spin the issue here their own way towards whatever they care about most, and I'm about to do the same. But there is no question that there is a long list of reasons, and Biden and the Dems should study that list very, very carefully. In my opinion, the party is way too corporatist. In my opinion, the party is way too preoccupied with policing speech and cultural issues and what's offensive and what isn't offensive and what's hate speech and what isn't hate speech. These are all things that the party needs to get away from. I'll also note that my analysis of the facts does not indicate that the problem within the Democratic Party is the progressive left. How do I have evidence for this? Well, for starters, AOC and her entire squad were reelected. I also noticed that Minnesota was carried for Biden, and the Dems did fairly well in that state, despite the Republicans in Minnesota making that race almost exclusively about Ilhan Omar's existence. And from a more broad perspective, it would appear that all of the congressmen and women who backed Medicare for All, which is basically public health care in the United States, won their re-election. As well, most of the ones who backed the Green New Deal won. So there you go. That's my 2 cents. The other thing I wanted to draw some attention to is the fact that voters indicated in exit polls that their top issues were the economy and COVID. We also know that turnout was actually quite good in this election. Now, typically, you take a high level of concern for COVID and the economy and a high turnout and assume a huge landslide win for Biden. The fact that it wasn't one should tell the Democrats a little bit more about what people really thought about COVID, what they thought about COVID measures, what they thought about the economy, and perhaps Trump's view of all those things was not quite as out of the mainstream as the mainstream media would like us to think. So yeah, there you guys go. That's kind of my broad view of the playing field as it stands. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is all this business about Trump not conceding or whether he should concede and the recounts and the litigation and that entire thing. So Trump told us in advance that if this was going to be a close election, he was going to pursue every avenue before conceding. So it doesn't surprise me that he is pursuing every avenue. It doesn't surprise me that he's not conceding. The question is, are his avenues worth pursuing, and should he totally voluntarily concede? That's a little bit of a complicated question. So, as far as whether he should concede, a lot of people have been making sort of parallels to the year 2000. This is not like that. That year was one state in question, and it was over like less than 2,000 votes in that state. It was an incredibly tight election, not like this one. This election is a lot closer to being the reverse of 2016, as I mentioned. And I will note that in 2016, Hillary Clinton, with a popular vote lead, and with many medias still not declaring the electoral count at 270, and with it being a huge shock, and with a lot of the states being tighter than they are in 2020, she still conceded. Why? Probably because she looked at her odds of overturning the election in several states versus the harm it would do to the country and said to hell with it. Now, Trump and some portion of the Trump universe sees it the other way. Well, that's fair enough, and they're certainly entitled to all their recounts and all their days in court. However, their odds are extremely long. As firm right-winger Karl Rove would point out, and has in the past week, this is a guy with a ton of first-hand experience in recounts. Pretty much all of the states here are way outside the normal range where a recount is likely to flip the state. Historically, the ranges would have to be like a small fraction of what they are. So having a recount overturn one state, never mind three states or more, is akin to winning a lottery. As for the litigation stuff, well, let's put it this way. There's always reports of various irregularities in a big election. There is a big line between presenting an allegation and presenting evidence. And I will also note that thus far the Trump team did bring their first three lawsuits, I believe. They happened in Wednesday, Thursday, Friday last week. And those lawsuits, if you read the transcripts from the courtroom, they did not inspire much confidence. And one of them was even a Trump appointed judge, and even that transcript was like grasping at straws. Maybe they have something better coming. I wouldn't count on it. You're looking for courts in multiple states to overturn multiple states. So there you go, guys. A little bit of a depressing video, I guess. If you want a more funny take on this whole election, I saw this little cartoon president bit that had me laughing like every 10 seconds. It was only about 6 minutes long. I'll link to it in the description. And I thought it was bang on as far as reality. But on that note, guys, hope this was useful. If it was, subscribe, hit that like button. We'll see you all next time.